Hey viewers, welcome back to another episode of The Lonely Overlander. As we roll into November, especially up here in Canada, we begin to see the days growing shorter and colder, and we reluctantly begin to realize the end of another travel season. Storing away the camping gear, taking the rooftop tent off the rig, and looking forward to the new year. In the off season, some of us begin thinking about some changes or mods we want to make to our rigs, or for me, finding a new rig. Or you may start thinking about planning that special overland trip you've been meaning to do, which brings us to today's episode. Last year I did an overland map tutorial episode which involved using the Crown Land Usage Policy Atlas from the Government of Ontario's website as a major resource for scouting camping spots. This earlier video also made use of the GaiaGPS app, which with a paid subscription gives you the Backroad Mapbook layer that's specifically useful for our overland needs here in Canada. When the people at Backroad Mapbooks saw the vid, they reached out and asked if I've ever used their mapping app. And to be totally honest, I've never really given it a thought. Well, today I decided to take another look into it and do a mapping video centered around the BRMB app and the browser map resources they also offer. And to be honest, once I got a look at the searchable features in the mapping database, I was hooked. As you'll see in this episode, I did run into some issues with planning an overland trip, but in all, I came away thinking just how much I've been missing out not utilizing this powerful tool. But if you watched my Swish a Loop series, you've noticed that I used a popular app from the other company and ran into a bunch of issues with it as well. So let's go dig into the Backroad Mapbook and I'll show you what I mean. Trip planning with Backroad Mapbooks can both be done with the phone app or a web browser on your PC. But pre-planning a trip or searching for an adventure is definitely easier on the computer. To start us off, just type in BRMB Maps into the search bar and hit enter. On the welcome screen, click on this folding map icon to get into the web map. Give it a few seconds to open. It's not super snappy like most browser maps for the simple fact that the sheer amount of data being loaded. Once you play around with the layout for a while, it'll become more intuitive. But for now, we're going to click on the first option on the page header, Browse Adventures. And here we can begin to see just how much map metadata BRMB has to offer. You could narrow your search to province or territory from here as well. If we take a look at the province of Ontario, for example, we can see some of the more popular activities listed, ATV trails being an obvious one. I have a pro subscription with my BRMB, and this gives me the vital Crown Land layer and recreational and industrial service roads map data layers. In my account profile, you can see a stats and badges collection page, a feature to help with user participation in map data collection, and you can also see a history of my saved trips. My last major adventure obviously being the epic and disastrous Swish a Loop trip. Here you can see all my trip data, all my waypoints and markers listed. So now when it comes to planning a new adventure, this is where the real power of Backroad Mapbooks comes into play. Back up to the page header once again, and this time we're going to click on the option titled Get Inspired. This brings up an 11 Activities Adventure category search feature, and the option for filtering your search results. As you can see, the database is currently showing over 130,000 entries before we even narrow down our search. I want to target my search to a specific area and check out a region further west than what I've explored already. My last trip into Northern Ontario was with my friend Lee, and we went north of Sudbury into some Crown Land for a few nights. This new area I'm interested in is the Algoma district, off the north shore of Lake Huron and butted up against the eastern Lake Superior shore, and it's a massive Crown Land area. Again, the map data pulls up some relevant data and many examples of outdoor activities in the region. But where the real power of the searchable database shines is in the search filters. Here you can narrow down your search criteria to dozens and dozens of different parameters. It's here I find it more useful to keep the search options narrowed down, at least initially, rather than clicking off a bunch of interests like fire towers or ghost towns. These kind of points of interest can be pulled up on the map afterwards, but if you're specifically looking for areas for rock climbing, for example, then by all means. For our purposes, what I'm really after are overland routes in the area, and it's awesome that the option is there to search for. While the search results didn't pull up any thumbnail images in the results for whatever reason, it did find over 200 examples of overland routes in the database. The first one and best match to this search is this one, the Northern Ontario Boreal route. Clicking on the thumbnail pulls up an overview of the route with a section of map and a description with a difficulty rating and route length. This one a decent 1,700 kilometers. Ontario and most of the northern regions of Canada contain a massive 1/3 portion of the global boreal forest. When I lived in the Muskoka region years ago, I was at the southernmost edge of the boreal, and the sheer amount of forest coverage as you travel north is astounding. It was for this reason this boreal overland route drew my attention. We can see in the description the route passes 7 of Ontario's least visited provincial parks, with lots of hiking and fishing opportunities. And check this out, a chance to see polar bears up close? Yeah, I'm in. Again, BRMB is trying to encourage user reviews and participation. I like the wish list option and the ability to complete an adventure and showcase it on your profile wall. So from here, we'll go ahead and open up the web map and give it a minute to load. It looks like the route waypoint centers us in the town of Wawa, Ontario, alongside the Trans-Canada Highway. But where is the route on the map? If you go over to the toolbar on the right, we can see the Layers option button. In here is where we want to curate the map data to suit our travel needs. Obviously, the first option we want to enable is the Overland route layer. And here we can see the route highlighted and the place marker thumbnail appear. Because we're planning an adventure and not just looking to follow directions, let's take advantage of all the pertinent metadata available to us to view. Attractions, parks, recreation sites, and industrial and recreational road layers. And of course, because we're trip planning, let's include waypoints, tracks, and trips. The Tracks feature is an option you can use to record your GPS location as you travel. For example, if you were to make and share your own overland route, an awesome feature. Okay, now we have our route visible and points of interest showing on the map. Going back into the route description, the first thing we need to do is add it to our trip and give it a title. For now, we'll mark this trip private in the options checkbox. Hit enter and the trip is saved in our user profile and is ready to be used. A lot of the saved adventures in the map database should include all the important travel information for the trip. And here we see that the Boreal Forest Overland route was designed to travel in a counterclockwise direction, mostly along Highway 11. As I already know, Highway 11 is in a familiar route north for me, and so I'll use the map search box to quickly get us to the greater Sudbury area on the map. And here again we see our route labeled heading east out of Sudbury. Of course, since we're going on an overland adventure, why not kick it off with a visit to a local lookout at the Lake Laurentian Conservation Area. Clicking on the waypoint brings up the detail window, and this is where we can click on the Add to Trip option. And going back into the trip planner, you can see it added to the trip itinerary. Since I'm venturing off on this trip from my home in Kitchener, by this point I might want to be looking for a lunch stop or an overnight camp location. Traveling east along the route, and here we see a rest area, so we'll go ahead and just add it to our trip the same way. We can see along the way that other overland routes are visible, and some even overlap. Closer to North Bay, we see some more stopover attractions, such as these waterfalls, and it may be something we might be wanting to visit. Turning north now, and you can get a taste of the immense map data available. A smattering of backcountry campsites are clearly marked. Whether they're suitable for parking a Bronco on or not, I don't know, but of course, there's only one way to find out. This is all part of the whole overlanding experience. You're probably wondering what all these little circle icons are. They're bundled map data points of interest, which show in more detail the closer you zoom in. Here we can see some nice paddle-in campsites and service road access to get you into the water, if canoeing or kayaking is your thing. So far on our Boreal Overland trip planning, we've been using the Backroad Mapbook base layer. But in all, there are 8 different map layers available, including satellite imagery, which will of course come in handy when it comes to looking for overnight camp locations. As we go farther north, we come into the Temiskaming region, and this may be a good opportunity for gassing up before continuing on. This is obviously a more populated area, so we might not see the kind of crownland camping areas we're interested in. As the route description highlighted, this route takes you past some Northern Ontario provincial parks, and of course, there's always an option for staying, especially if you're looking for amenities like laundry or a hot shower. Here, for example, is Esker Lakes Provincial Park. A lot of camping enthusiasts visit and collect provincial park passport stickers, myself included, and this route might be ideal for hitting up some of those lesser visited northern parks. They'd surely appreciate you stopping over. Further north and we come across Highway 101, and here's a spot I didn't notice the first time I went over the route, but may be worth checking out. Ghost Mountain and Ghost Range. Definitely an interesting spot to check out. Not sure if I'd want to spend the night there though. If you travel east down 101 from here, you'll eventually end up at the Quebec border. This highway is one of the only connections of the Trans-Canada that joins Nipigon and Temagami and spans over 470 kilometers over some of the most remote regions in Northern Ontario. Okay, so maybe you're not a fan of ghosts, but for sure at some point you'll want to be looking for some spots to camp at. So now we're going to switch over from the base layer map to the satellite imagery layer. And immediately you can see an issue. This layer view is basically covering over route and waypoints. Whether this is a map fault or by design, we'll just go back into the layers option window and retoggle the layer options. So basically we want to find an area that's accessible and ideally also maybe have lake access. Right away we see Perry Lake here. However, drilling down into the satellite image, we can see the lake is populated with cottages, so we're just going to have to look elsewhere. The same over here with Munro Lake. This is basically how it's done with crownland camping. You're not going to find signage or markers directing you to the prime secluded lakefront camp spots. You search for them like this until you find something promising, and then you go check it out. Here's a small lake with possible water access. Looks like maybe a nearby gravel pit, but some obvious locations for setting up. If we go back into the map layers and toggle on the all-important crownland layer, we can see this spot is not crownland. And then pulling back and traveling further west, the crownland is pretty sporadic here. Obviously a higher populated region, so we're just going to keep searching westward along our route. Here we come across a small town, and this might be another opportunity to gas up before moving on. Gas ups probably being few and far between way up here. I'll temporarily turn off the crownland layer to clean up the satellite view. Here's another waterfalls that might be worth a stop, so we'll add it to the trip. Again, this is basically the process. This is how I go about finding those spots to spend the night. No doubt the remoteness of the area will offer plenty of options. It's just a matter of finding them and marking them. As we make for the turn back south, we come across a forested area next to the highway. We can see some multiple clearings for potentially setting up. Even some smaller lakes are visible. Here you can see the service roads the forestry companies put in. If you look closely, you can see unmarked trails or roads all over most of the area as well. They may be passable or they may be grown over. It all depends on how adventurous you feel, I guess, but they're out there. But maybe at this point you're already tired from the long drive and you just want a quick overnight stop. For this example, we'll just pick this clearing here. If we go over to the toolbar and select the waypoint icon, we can drop a pin on the location we want to mark. We give it a name and then select the activity, in this case campsite, and then click save, and nothing. If we go back into the layers option and try toggling off and on the waypoint layer, again nothing. If we go into our trip itinerary, we also don't see the waypoint listed in the trip. Another bug in the web map perhaps? After contacting tech support after the issues I've been having using their map, it turns out most of the map metadata is shown in the original Backroad Mapbook base layer we started out with. Okay, so let's go back over to the map layers icon and go back to the base layer map, except clicking it doesn't do anything this time. If we go back to the toolbar and click on the tools and database option, we can indeed see our stopover waypoint is saved there. Clicking on the magnifying glass icon will center the map view over the invisible waypoint, so we do know it's there, and it is accessible. For now, we'll just double check the area to make sure it's indeed Crown Land, and then we see that we're good to go. Further discussions with tech support suggested maybe third-party pop-up or ad blockers on my browser may be causing the issue, but disabling them didn't change the map behavior. Alright, so moving along, we can see there are tons of opportunities to get off the highway and explore off-road, and usually the farther you get away from the main roads, the better. Here you can see a good example of the seasonal nature of the satellite imagery with some snow cover and frozen lakes visible. And here's a valuable piece of info when using forestry or mining roads, the potential for gated access, specifically lock gates. As we come up to the town of White River, we see another attraction marker. As it turns out, White River is the hometown of Winnie the Pooh. The description gives you some nice backstory to the whole Pooh Bear thing. We'll add it to the trip and see if we can't find the statue of Winnie for a photo op that we can later upload and share to the waypoint data. Some more attractions that we might visit, and pulling back, lots of areas for potential exploration again. It looks like most, if not all, of this route uses paved roads, so calling it an overland route may be a bit of a stretch, but having the ability to turn off the highway and find some nature honey hole to set up camp is an option most any SUV hauling a camper wouldn't have. And now here the loop brings us back to Wawa, Ontario, where the route marker was placed. Not too far down the road we see another curated overland route, this one the Mooseback Manitou Mountain Loop, and it may be worth the time to check it out while we're in the area. If nothing else, the Boreal Overland route offers seemingly plenty of opportunities to visit scenic waterfalls. This one here looks like maybe a hydroelectric station when we zoom down closer. So because of the stuck satellite map layer issue, I found the best way to get back to the Backroad Mapbook base layer is basically going back into your adventure wall and viewing your newly saved route. This will reload your trip using the base mapbook layer. You can see the trip itinerary listed on the trip planner with all your stops laid out. From the itinerary, clicking on the magnifying glass icon will again center the map over the listed waypoint. But you can also see that our saved waypoints from our overnight stay isn't listed in the itinerary. Zooming way out on the map, you can see the camp marker displayed on the base layer, and you'll no doubt see it later on while you're driving in the route with your phone. So now that we have the trip planned, we need to create a set of directions to get us there from our home location. For this example, I'm going to use the rest stop at Venue River as our initial destination. Clicking on the waypoint brings up the typical side menu, and you'll notice the to and from directions buttons. Obviously this will be a go-to point, so selecting that brings up the dialog box for entering in a starting location. I'll just enter in my hometown of Kitchener in the box and click on the relevant search location, and just like that the route is laid out for us. However, with this being basically an off-road map similar to GaiaGPS, there is no turn-by-turn directions like what you'd expect with Google or Apple Maps, but from what I've read, the feature is currently being worked on. They're also working on an Android Auto and Apple CarPlay integration feature, so that'll be great on the 12-inch Bronco screen eventually. So basically all that's left is to add this route to our trip, and here you can see it added on the itinerary. Which brings us to sharing your newly planned overland route. Going back into your account, you will notice the share icon over your saved trip tile. You have the opportunity to share the trip on the usual social media accounts or copying a shareable link to share with other vehicles traveling with you. If we go into our phone and open up the BRMB app, you'll see along the bottom of the toolbar. Selecting the Your Data option will bring up the saved data in your account. Going into the Trips section, and we should see our trip saved in the cloud listed. Clicking on our newly curated trip will give us the option to download the data. Once loaded, we should find the trip itinerary listed. You should also see a green checkmark beside the trip indicating that it's downloaded to your device. Of course, we need to enable all the pertinent layers that we need and use in the Webmap, and also any other options we might find interesting for our trip. When you load the map now, you should immediately see the trip you created and the route to your first stop location. When you start zooming into the map, you should then see the saved map data starting to appear, such as the Boreal Forest Overland route itself. So because our trip is going to take us to some pretty remote areas, we might fall out of cellular data coverage. So the thing to do in this case is to download and save the map data to your phone. Saving maps gives you the option on how detailed you want your data. We'll select regional view in this case, as this should give us a nice balance of map detail and the amount of data storage required to save to the phone. I like to also save satellite data when doing this, as you may need to find alternate stopover locations while en route. You can see it's not a huge amount of data really. It might be useful to have some areas of your trip with more detailed maps saved. For example, areas in which you plan on going off-route to do some exploring. If you go into the Manage Map or Offline Maps option, you should now see the map data listed and you can manage it from there. And so that's basically it, your newly planned trip ready to go. So that's one trip worked out that I definitely plan on running, and for sure I'm going to be spending a lot of time over the winter exploring and planning some epic trips. One that I've already been mapping out recently is the Trans-Taiga Overland route. If you're not familiar with this one, it basically takes you through northern Quebec to the most remote location you can travel by road anywhere in North America. I just hope there isn't any wooden bridges along the way. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found some valuable information to help you plan some epic trips. If you have some trips planned, and specifically if you found some of the resources in this video helpful, post a comment on where you're going next. As always, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next time right here on TLO. Hey viewers, and welcome back to The Lonely Overlander. As we roll into November, especially up here in Canada, we begin to see the... What do you got there? As we roll into November, especially up here in Canada, we begin to see the days growing shorter and colder.